You're about to see what it's like to actually build apps from scratch using AI and Cursor. Now, a quick note before we dive in, this walkthrough was recorded a little while ago, so the interface you're going to see in the video versus what you're probably using right now in Cursor is slightly different, but that's not really what matters here. I want you to actually focus on the mindset, the framework behind it, and the workflows and tools that we're using. So, really, the way we're thinking, prompting, giving context, and structuring our projects to actually ship faster with AI. So, whether you've never coded before and this is your first web app you're building, or rethinking how you currently code, this session isn't about memorizing these shortcuts. It's about learning a new way to work with these tools, and you'll see how I use Cursor as a AI pair programmer, how to actually think modularly but not delegate my thinking, and how to move from an idea to MVP with confidence. All right, let's get into it.
All right, so in this module, we're going to cover cursor setup and configuration. So you're going to go to cursor.com and follow the installation instructions that are provided. Now, you may get a prompt that says, if you have VS Code, you can import your existing settings. Otherwise, if you don't have VS Code, you can just ignore this and move on with the default settings. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to open up cursor settings. That's going to be in your top left when you click on cursor, and it's going to have a submenu item that says cursor settings. You're going to open that up, and we're going to go through this step by step as to how I personally have it configured. Now, keep in mind, there is no right or wrong way. It's just dependent on your workflow and what works best for you. I'm going to show you what works best for me, but you can toggle this and choose different settings based on your own liking. Now, the most important thing is the data settings feature right here with privacy mode. So whether you're working for yourself or in a company, some companies prefer to have privacy mode enabled so that you're not sharing data with your code. But keep in mind that there are certain beta features like background agents that do require you to have privacy mode settings on. I have it on because I like to test new features and share data and help improve the experience, but that entirely depends on you and how much access you want to have to beta features. Now, if you do have VS Code, you can import these settings. This is typically for people that have coded before. If you haven't, then it's not really relevant to you. Now let's move on to the chat settings. I typically have my default mode as an agent. These are custom modes that we'll cover later in a different module, but I like to have my default as an agent mode, the text size is default, and pretty much have all of these settings on. The only three settings I don't have on are MCP tool protection, dot file protection, and external file protection. We'll cover what these are later on. MCPs are essentially external tools that your agent can call. It's an interface for another way of working with APIs and other tools. DAW file protection is typically for files that you don't want to commit to your GitHub or files that you don't want your agent to look at. For example, you have a .env, which stores your API keys to work with external APIs. You may not want your agent to actually work with those files and modify them. Now, that's entirely dependent on you. I have this off, but everything else is essentially on and helps me improve my workflow development process. Now, please ensure you have custom modes on. It is a beta feature, and we're going to be using this quite a lot, and I'll cover it in a different module. For tabs, so what is tab? Tab is, we'll cover what the interface actually looks like, but the tab is when you're in an actual code file, and as you're writing code or making changes, it may give you a partial suggestion or autocomplete, where you press tab and it'll complete it for you or move on to the next line and configure some other parts of the code that's related to that. This is essentially context aware across multiple files. I do have all this on to make this as easy as possible for me. Now let's talk about models. So there's essentially two types of models. You have thinking models and agentic models. Thinking models are very much ideal for solving complex problems. Think as them as a deep expert in optimized for solving step-by-step reasoning and error correction, or essentially looking at very complex tasks for them to think through how to solve it. I use this quite a bit, and how it essentially works is essentially I use this to create development plans, implementation plans, or if I have a very hard problem that I want to solve for, I'll use a thinking model like O3 to come up with a plan on how to fix this. Now, you have agentic models that are very much focused on task execution and tool calls. If you have agents with MCPs enabled, so these are the external tools and services, this agent will work with these MCPs or have internal tool calls, such as editing a file or importing something, and it's very much action-oriented. What works really well is if you're working on solving a very hard problem, you can use a thinking model like O3 to come up with a plan on how to solve that problem. And then you switch to an agentic model to actually execute on that plan for you. So these are the current settings that I have. These models change over time as these providers update the models or release new ones, but this is what I currently have as of this date. Now you can enable max mode depending on the plan that you have. I have it on. I am willing to spend as much money as possible to get the best I can out of Cursor. It is built on API pricing, and if you click on it, it'll show details on what that pricing looks like. That is entirely dependent on you. Max mode is very much optimized for handling the most demanding and complex problems, and it's really much the best for challenging development tasks. Now, background agents is part of the beta program, which is related to the data sharing that we talked about. We'll cover this in a separate module. It's a whole thing on its own, but you can toggle this on and we'll cover what that is. Next was tools integrations. So you can connect GitHub and Slack. This is directly related to background agents, Bugbot, and again, a separate complete module on background agents and how to use GitHub. You can connect now if you have an existing repo in GitHub. If not, I'll show you how to use GitHub and actually help you show how to connect background agents. But for now, just you can leave it as is if you don't have the right settings, or we can come back to this. These are the ones that I have enabled. I'll show you how to actually add MCP tools, both from existing directories or just configure your own. So just keep in mind, we'll come back to this because it's a completely different section. Now let's move on to rules. I do have memories on. This is essentially preferences based on how you like to work, and it saves it as a memory into your chat. You can manage your memories. So I have some, for example, depending on the project, around like styling. You can actually modify these rules if you wanted to, remove them. Sometimes you'll see in your chat it says saving a memory, or you can prompt it to save a memory. So we'll show you what that looks like in workflow. I also have rules. I have a rule that's applied at a global level. You can actually edit these rules to be either at a project level or a global level. So you can see, you can add project level rules. So if you have a specific project, you can add to it, but you can also apply global rules. And I'll share below the module what this prompt looks like for a rule. It's pretty standard. It's really much focused on core philosophy, design principles, coding style, and how to write the actual code structure itself. I don't add project-specific rules. I do have one or two projects where I have project-specific rules based on the preferences, but that's entirely up to you. Now, let's talk about indexing. Basically, when you start a new project, you're going to be able to actually index your code base so that your agents and all the other agentic features within Cursor are able to reference the files that you have. And you want to actually have all these toggled on. So essentially, you want to index new folders. You want to have files to exclude as part of indexing. It's entirely up to you if you wanted to. You can add files for your agent to not index, and you add that to .cursor.ignore as a folder. I'll show you what that looks like, but I generally don't mind indexing all of it. Now, you can actually add pages as documentation for you to reference to. I have individual links that I've added in here, and each one essentially is indexed for my agent to reference, and you can actually reference it in chat. And I'll show you what that looks like. Documentation that is already, I believe, included in Cursor, but you can also add your own. And I'll show you how you can use both documentation that's been crawled and documentation that you can copy paste into chat as reference. And we'll go through what that looks like in a specific workflow together. Network, I've never ran or any diagnostic tests or compatibility modes. I've heard that sometimes this helps if you can't get your request through, but I haven't really touched this. And then lastly, I have early access on with notepads and background agents. And these are essentially all the features that I've covered. So keep in mind that we're going to have individual modules for all of these kind of different features like background agents and MCPs and how things work. And you can come back and reference this for those settings if you wanted to. The most important thing to know about how indexing works is that each Cursor instance initializes indexing for that workspace. And after initial setup, it'll automatically index new files to keep context current if you have this enabled. And it pretty much provides a very comprehensive code-based understanding for better AI assistance. Let's go on to the next module. Okay, so now that we have your Cursor complete setup and configured to your workflows, let's get started with going through some of the key features, the interface, and how to get enabled to create your first custom mode. So the most important thing is you want to get started with a project. Now, projects are essentially folders that you can open up within Cursor. I have my projects always stored as a folder in my desktop. And what you can do is create a folder in your desktop or wherever else you want. I personally like in my desktop. That's easy for me to reference to. And I'm going to go click on Open Project. And then from there, I'm going to go to my desktop and projects. So this one, I have all my projects in here, but this one, I have my module videos that I'm recording this in. So I'm going to open this one. Now let's talk about the interface. All right. So with the interface, you have a bunch of different buttons and features that we can cover. So let's start with the directory on the left. This is the directory structure of your entire folder, and you can do a bunch of different things in here. So first thing you can do is you can create a new file. So you can go example.md or example.txt, and you can even create folders. So we can say example folder. You can refresh the Explorer if you delete a file or you want to make sure that your folders are up to date. You can also collapse all the folders if you have anything in there. Now you also have notepads, so you can actually create notepads in here. This is more for you if you want to take notes for later on. You can reference these notepads, but I personally just write all my notes in here. As you can see in this right side in the chat, the notepad is being referenced. We'll talk about the chat interface shortly, but I want to show you an example of how you can take your notes. You can also have an outline. We'll cover what this looks like later on as we start building our app and starting working in Cursor, and timeline, which kind of shows the local history of all the changes that you've made or saved. It's entirely up to you if you want to, but I prefer to just write all my notes in the directory itself. All right, now let's move on to the chat interface right here. So you can see that essentially you're able to reference notepads, files, code specifically, if you have any specific files, documentation. So remember we talked about previous docs. You can also add a doc directly in here if you've imported a doc, which is done by a link. I'll show you an example of that looks like. And then also you can reference a GitHub repository if you're connected to your GitHub repo. We'll go through all this more in detail, but I just want to give you an example of what these are. If you have any cursor rules, no rules right now, it's a complete empty file. Terminal, linter errors, or you can actually scrape the web if you provide a recent, like a link for it to actually reference to scrape, or recent changes you've made. We also have our modes here. So we have agent mode, axe mode, manual, and then all the custom modes. We'll cover in the next module how to create your first mode. And then you can also, as you remember, I mentioned there is an auto mode for your models. You can toggle this on and off and select the mode depending on the type of task that you have at hand. You can also import screenshots and images if you have anything. So sometimes you want to reference a specific part of your code on the site and you want to make changes, so you can have it as a screenshot as context. I'll show you how to actually use that workflow and kind of improve. On here, you can create new chats. So if you want to open up a new chat, you can press Command N if you're on Mac, or you go Command T to create two chats at the exact same time. So if you want to run two parallel agents or two different tasks at the same time. You also have chat history. So if you've created multiple chats, you can reference previous chats, go back to it, or you can close all chats, clear all chats, export a chat, copy the request. So if you have, let's say, a chat that you've created in one project and you want to replicate in a different project, you can do that. You can also your chat settings that we covered previously, and run a background agent, which we'll cover in a separate module. The most important thing is also just knowing that in the code base, so this is in the code view or the file view, you can actually have the tab suggestions that we talked about. So say, for example, as you're running your code, example code I want to write, which is write a function that randomizes integers in JavaScript. Depending on the tab view, as you're running your code, you may get a suggestion. I'll show you what that looks like, but you can also add prompts within the file view. So say, for example, I can press Command K for a quick edit and say, write function in JavaScript to randomize integers. And it goes ahead and provides a suggestion of what that looks like. And you can add a follow-up if you wanted to, or you can accept it or reject it. We're going to accept it. And then say I want to add this to chat, I can go to Command L. It references the file and a highlighted selection as a chat and say, based on this document, create a JS file for this function. And it's going to go ahead and create a new file. And now we have a new file in here that we can accept or stop. And you can also stop right here. So we're going to accept this. And we're going to go into the file right here. And you can, for example, we talked about tab suggestions. Say, for example, you want to completely remove this and change it to generate random integer between min and max. So you saw how there was a suggestion. I pressed tab and it provided that as a suggestion. Now, it may provide more suggestions. In this case, it's not really relevant, but if you wanted to, you can just take it out. Oh, it created a duplicate, and you can see in this here, it says tab to jump here. You press that and it's going to remove it and create a constant instead. Yeah, so there's different ways if you know exactly what the function is that you want to write, and what you want the suggestion to look like. Now, let's say we wanted to make another change to this and say, actually, turn this into a random password generator that randomizes characters, numbers, and special characters, I guess. And so characters, let's say letters. Now you can also stop this. Say, for example, you made a change and you want to actually go back because it's not aligned to what you're asking for or what you expected the end outcome to be. So we're going to go ahead and let this actually change it to what you prompted it to, but you can also just scroll back and click on restore checkpoint. And it's going to take you back to exactly what you previously had. It deleted the file, it removed all the code, and it's based on that prompt if you want to reprompt it. If you're okay with it, then you can just press down right here, I clicked it to go back to these changes. And you can see all the different changes it provided based on the prompt that we provided previously. As you can see, there's different ways to interact with this. You have your folder, you have a file within the folder, you can create it in here, or you can also right click, new file, new folder, or reveal in Finder, or also open in the terminal, and you can create a new chat here. Now, the last thing we want to cover is the terminal. The terminal can be activated by clicking on terminal on the top Mac menu that you have, and you click on new terminal, or alternatively, you can actually press on Command Shift squiggly line, or the squiggly line is below the ESC button on your keyboard, and it's going to open up the terminal. And the terminal is going to be a place where you're going to perform certain actions or run certain commands based on your code. And it's going to include commands to run a local server, to build your app for production, to preview your app changes, to push changes to your Git. And we're going to cover all that later on. But for now, you can just get a sense of what this terminal looks like and what you can do with the terminal and all the different settings with it. You can also get your agent to run the terminal for you. If you're not comfortable with terminal, which I do recommend you actually learn the commands, get familiar with it, you can actually tell the agent to say, hey, run a terminal or do the specific thing that you want the agent to provide for you, and it'll actually run the terminal codes for you. All right, now let's talk about something very exciting that I always like to use in Cursor, and it's going to be custom modes. They're foundational for anything you do within Cursor, and it's going to enable you to accelerate your workflow. Now, what are custom modes? Custom modes are specialized AI agents designed for very specific domain tasks. They enable you to create these AI assistants by combining specialized prompts and instructions, MCPs, and optimized for a specific task, tool calls and integrations, and custom rules and behaviors. I want you to think as custom modes as your own AI specialists for very repetitive or complex tasks. Now, if you recall earlier, I talked about thinking models and agentic models. For example, O3 is a very good thinking model at planning and implementation, and it's very superior at breaking down complex tasks with this deep thinking and reasoning. It's able to actually break down these complex problems or tasks into steps for something like an agentic model to execute on. So Sonnet 4 is an agentic model where it's excellent at identifying the key points. It's very good at making tool calls like file editing, uploading, or doing operational tasks. And it's very much good and suited for executing on those tasks. A really powerful strategy is to actually sequence between these models. So say, for example, you use O3 as part of your planning phase to think through and create a comprehensive plan. And then you have your execution phase where you're using Sonnet 4 to actually act on that plan by calling MCPs, tools, and doing file operations. This essentially enables you to leverage each model's strengths for the best optimal results. Now, let's create our first custom mode based on what we've just covered. The most important mode to me is the PRD generator. The first custom mode we're going to create is the PRD generator, which is the foundation for a lot of these projects. And what we're going to do is click on the chat. So if you don't have the chat open, you click on Command I, open it, and you're going to click on Agent, scroll down, and do Add Custom Mode. Now keep in mind, again, I will share all these prompts with you and all the settings for it, so you don't have to worry about trying to copy paste this in the video. We're going to call this PRD generator. And basically, the most important thing is because this is going to be a planning custom mode or workflow where we're going to ask it to create product requirements documentation. PRD stands for product requirements documentation. It's the foundation for any time you're building an app where you want to list out all the product requirements as to how to build out this product. we're going to choose the model to be O3. And basically, it's going to be O3 max thinking model. I have it on max mode. If you don't want to pay for the API pricing, you can just have the regular mode as well. It's completely fine. Key bindings, I don't have any key bindings for it. I'm not using it that much. We're going to enable all tools, search, edit, run, MCP servers. So I have Firecrawl, Perplexity, Playwright, Xsup. Technically, I don't need Playwright for it. I may need to at some point, and we're going to cover what these MCPs are. I'm going to show you how to add MCPs later on, and you can come back to this mode and turn it on. The most important thing here is you want it to be able to auto run, auto fix errors, and add the entire prompt into this custom agent mode. So the prompt looks something like this. So we're going to copy this right here, go back to our PRD generator, drop it to custom instructions. So it's a set of instructions that this agent will follow in sequential steps. And I'm going to show you exactly what each set of section of the instructions are, so you have an idea of how it actually works. And we're going to click done. If you wanted to, you can actually just change the icon. I'll use a brain here just to make it really cool. Now, the prompt is essentially going to be a set of instructions to first create a executive summary for you. It's going to define the scope of the work that it's going to be doing, target market and user analysis. So it's going to actually define who your ideal customers are. It's going to create the ICP, ideal customer profile, build user stories around it, user personas, create user flows, build out detailed requirements, the technical architecture, build out what your file structure could look like, build out your database schema. So if you're going to be connecting to a database, going to give you the API design and endpoints. And then also more importantly, it's going to kind of build out the different kind of development tasks by category and the subtasks associated with it and what the effort will look like in the implementation roadmap. You can actually use this prompt anytime you're working on a project and you want to build out a product requirement documentation. You can use this prompt and create a very detailed document on how to build a specific project. And I'll show you exactly how to use this custom mode. All right, now let's actually put this custom mode into use. This is probably the most foundational custom mode for any time I'm building a specific app. I always start with the product requirements document, or the PRD. This custom mode is perfect because it's a perfect balance between a product manager and a technical architect or engineer. It brings a hybrid between how the product should be built and the technical aspects of it that go behind the scenes. Now, the most important thing is when you're using this PRD generator, ensure you have all the right settings in place. I always just make sure that I have tools enabled, advanced options, prompt is right, and we have the set model in place as well. We're using a thinking model here, O3, which is really good at sequential thinking. And the most important thing is that we just have all those checkmarks in place. You'll see that I have MCPs enabled. We're not going to use MCPs in this instance here for this PRD generator, but I'll show you what that looks like in another example. Just to be quick, you can use it, for example, like a Perplexity search MCP, where you'll do a search on a specific topic, use that as research or context, and then pull that in to actually inform and generate a PRD based on whatever research the MCP brought back for you. But we're not going to be doing that in this case because it's just not necessary. Now, the most important thing is that once you have the prompt and the settings in place, we're going to get started with building our first initial PRD. We're going to keep these simple. We're going to call this prd.md. Now, you'll see I use MD files quite a bit. This is just a personal preference. You can use .text files or .md. I use MD because I can then just interchange all these files, or I guess they're very interoperable. I can use this in Obsidian or other tools. Markdown is very broad and universal. It's accepted and used everywhere. It's just a personal preference. I recommend you probably stick with the MD file format. Now, in this prompt specifically, this PRD generator is not only going to give you from a product aspect of what the persona should look like, the core user stories or the ICP or the key features, but it gives you a breakdown of the app scaffolding. It gives you an idea of what the schema structure would look like. It gives you an idea of the system architecture diagram and a detailed task breakdown. This is important because it's putting together a plan that's considering all of this and a full breakdown of this. Because it's giving you a full breakdown of the database schema, the scaffolding, the thinking model is doing all this for you, so that when you switch to an agent model as a developer to execute on this, it doesn't have to use a lot of context and input to actually make those decisions because it's already thought out for. Now, you'll see that this PRD already has some recommendations on the technical stack and what it should use. In most common apps, React is used as the framework. It's a JavaScript framework. If you're not familiar with this, I do recommend you actually just get an overview or primer on just programming languages and how apps are built. Maybe I'll do a separate module on this and just give you a high-level overview of all the different languages. But commonly used programming languages are JavaScript with React and TypeScript, sometimes Next.js, Svelte. Now, React is important because it's so commonly accepted and used by a lot of developers, but also if you're building in Bolt or Lovable, they also use React. And if sometimes you'll see people actually build in Lovable and then migrate to Cursor with their code base to keep building on it. And it's just a very universal like programming language. Also the backend, the database, Supabase is very common. So people typically build in React, they use Supabase, and they use a framework called Next.js, which is a package that helps kind of the code all together from a lot of the things you would need to make an application functional. And then they use Supabase as a database to connect real information in the database to the front end and then host it on something like Vercel or Vercel. In this instance, we are going to be using React. We are going to be using Supabase. I'll show you where you can deploy some of this code base in later modules as we build this kind of MVP app. But for now, just think about the fact that we're going to be using React and then also using Tailwind as the utility styling class. A lot of apps that have styling, they use something called CSS. You can write CSS directly in there, or you can use a package like Tailwind, which is a set of utility classes that you can apply to your code base, quickly build designs and quickly build the front end without having to actually write it yourself. Again, this is not a Tailwind or programming deep dive. I'll provide some resources for that, but I'll cover it in maybe a separate module, just going through what that actually looks like. So we have a PRD file, and I usually just like to write down what my end outcome is or what I'd like to do, which is create a simple job board curating no-code jobs like for Webflow, Framer, Make.com, NAN, and similar roles. For the MVP, I want to keep it simple. I only want to have mock data on the front end and no database. Now, the key thing here is I always want to, when I'm building a product, is to just isolate what the minimum viable product looks like. What is the just initial version of this product without having to connect to a backend or a server, and I just want to get it up and running to see what it looks like. So what I wrote down is keep it simple, mock data on the front end, no database connection. And typically job boards have 3 roles: people that can view jobs on the main page, employers to post jobs, and the admins to review, approve, delete jobs. For MVP, just focus on the public facing jobs, job board with mock data. This just keeps things simple so we can get things going, and then we'll work backwards to connect the database. We just want to make sure that we get the MVP where we can just see the jobs and see what it looks like, and then we'll think about how we connect the database. So what we're going to do is in the chat interface here, we're going to reference the PRD. You can drag it over, or ultimately you can go prd.md and add this as context. Or if you wanted to, you can actually go at PRD, and I'll write here, make sure I have the mode selected, say, based on this initial PRD, please complete it and make it comprehensive. All right, we're going to hit send. And what's going to happen is 2 things. Sometimes these thinking models, again, we talked about how they're difficult to make tool calls sometimes. It may actually make the tool call and edit the file, or give you the response like it is right now in the chat, and then you have to prompt it to say, hey, add it to the actual file. So I'm glad this happened because I want to show you sometimes how tool calls and fails if you're not very explicit. If I were to revise this prompt, and I'm going to do it to show you, I would actually say, make sure you add it to prd.md. That happens and it's completely normal. But what's really special about this PRD generator is it's going to give you the scaffolding and also memory diagrams on how you would build out the flow or the data flow between the entire architecture of the app itself with the database schema, which is insane because it is all the thinking for you. It's very comprehensive from a feature standpoint as well. So it failed a tool call. It wasn't able to actually create the system architecture diagram. And you'll see the code behind the diagram, but the tool call failed. And what we can do is, why don't we actually get the model to add this to PRD MD and update the doc. And then what I'll do is I'll switch the model. Anytime your prompts don't work, likely it's an issue with the model itself or the way you've prompted. And I'll cover the key aspects of prompt engineering, but you always want to give a context and be very direct as to whether it should run an MCP or update a file, and try to get it as targeted as possible to avoid any errors. You can see that now it's actually updating the PRD file with what we've talked about. So in this instance, it's going to go ahead and update the PRD file, and we can say, make sure you include So you saw how I added the plus button. You can actually insert a message whilst thinking through. Make sure to include the mermaid diagrams as well. So we insert a new message, and hopefully it'll actually update the diagrams and add the entire PRD in there. So as you can see here, we have the entire PRD itself in there. I'm just going to remove this. It did not update or edit that part, but we have a very comprehensive PRD based on what was provided. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the model to Claude 4 Sonnet and say, can you please generate more mermaid diagrams based on the flows and how to approach development. I want to have full context to prepare for development. And let's see what it creates with mermaid diagrams and if we can add it back into the file. So it's going to create very comprehensive mermaid diagrams based on the PRD to make sure that we have full comprehensive plan on what this MVP will look like. Now, something interesting is happening here. I'm seeing the PRD tool call is taking some time, and this is likely because I'm using a max thinking model, which is not the right approach. So I'm actually going to press stop, change the model, go to Claude 4 Sonnet, and I'll say include it in the doc and in this chat so I can see what it looks like. And hopefully, in this instance, I'll remove a max mode so it's not doing advanced reasoning and thinking because it doesn't need to. And it can create these member diagrams and just make the tool calls so we can get done and move on to the next step. And it's gone ahead and actually added more member diagrams. This is not necessarily all the time, but we're just showing the primary user journey and what that is. So you can see right here what the flow looks like, which is pretty cool. The MVP data flow. So basically it's going to use Next.js page load, React state management. One thing I don't like is I actually don't want to use Next.js. This is just a technical preference. I want to keep things simple and just use React Router. Look, it even created a development workflow of what that process would look like on a day basis. So imagine if you're actually a product manager and you want to create a development timeline, which is insane. And then say management flow, development strategy and approach. It failed the last tool call. It has all of the comprehensive flows in place. The only thing I would do is just say, I don't want to use Next.js. I want to keep it super simple. What are my options? This is just a personal preference. There are no right or wrong way to do this. I probably maybe want to use, I think it may recommend React Router. I'm not too sure. It's something that I just have a personal preference towards. Yeah. Oh, it's going to say Vite. Yeah. Or Vite. Perfect. Yeah, Netlify or Vercel. Perfect. Yeah. So what's really cool is that it talked about what it's recommending, why it's great, and how you set it up, and essentially how simple it is. And then a comparison. So PHTML, CSS, React plus Vite, Vite is Vite. We're going to go with React and Vite or Vite. I'm not too sure on the pronunciation. I agree with the recommendation. Modern developments, component reusability, easy state management. This is perfect. We're ready to move on to the next step. Before we go ahead and start working on the project, the job board from the PRD, I want to talk to you about rules. Now, what are rules? Rules are essentially a set of guiding principles that your agent can follow. It provides very consistent outputs and behavior based on the context of your development workflow so that it ensures it understands your preferences, standards, and requirements. There's two types of rules and they're applied at different scopes. So you can have actual global rules that are applied across all your project and workspaces. So this could be your general coding preferences, universal standards, or personal workflow. And you can actually set it in the settings section. I'll show you what that looks like. Or you can have project rules where they're specific to individual projects or code bases. And it's very project specific. So it's whether it's a tech stack or team standards, or just a way to approach actually like developing the UI. So you can have a set of global rules applied across all projects and then project specific rules. Now you can actually add rules manually, either in a folder called .cursor or directly to the cursor settings panel. And I'll show you how to do that through the settings panel because I think it's the easiest way to do. Now I already have an existing rule. This is a global rule that I've come up with where essentially just follows clarity over clarity, structures, do not repeat yourself. So there's a dry method where it doesn't have to repeat back to you what it wants to say. And just from a technical standpoint, it keeps things very componentized and structured and very easy and simple to understand, and it documents the code base. So we're going to copy the rule here, go to settings, cursor.settings, click on rules, and then we're going to add a global rule here. And I'll press done. Now, say for example, you want to add project specific rules. So you can actually go to, so you can see over here, actually create a folder for you. So you can go here and say standards.mdc, and it'll create an MDC file. And then you can actually create the rule type. So whether you want it to be manual, so as you're in the chat, you can reference the rule. So you can say, build out this UI for the dashboard, and then you'll say at UI standards MDC, and it's referencing the rule. Or you can, or change it to agent requested. So say for example, when you should be when this rule should be used, for example, when you're building out front end, or you can say auto attach, so it always attaches it based on some sort of file pattern that you have, depending. So say for example, if your file ends in .tsx, it can always attach that rule, or it can do always. Most of the time, depending on the rule that I have, I want to either just apply as a global rule, or if it's a project specific rule, I'll have it always auto attached. And basically I'll say use shadcn components, always use Tailwind. Now I'm not going to add that rule, but because we'll maybe add it as we go through the project, but for now, I just want to show you what that looks like at a project specific level. When you're building out your rules, try to be very specific about what the instructions the agent should follow and explain why the rule should actually exist. So you can see over here, when we have the global rule, we talk about what it's supposed to be following, the key principles, the style, the implementation. So what you want to ensure is that it's focused, it includes examples. I also recommend that if you're building out global rules, try to start very small and iterate from it. In the documentation of a cursor, they also include this as well. They say you want to have just small iterations of rules that you can add and then just iterate on top of based on the responses you get, and just assess whether or not the rule is actually effective. And when you're starting out with your rules, try to cover the code style if it's focused on coding, documentation. So for example, in our rule, we have a comment on whether or not I should actually document the code. You can also try to ensure that when you're deciding on attachment, you think about what is the best case here, whether or not you want to have a task-based, context-based, problem-based, or technology-based, right? If you're doing agent decides as an attachment, then I recommend you include clear descriptions on why it should include this rule. From a very hierarchical standpoint, I always just start with your global rule. So that's a baseline. Then add your project rules as you're building your project. Don't go straight into a project in the beginning and start adding project rules. Try to look at specific patterns or prompts that you're constantly repeating that you think will be better off if you just create a rule around it versus trying to manually type each prompt each time. And I would say just to leave it off, just add the rules, test it, iterate it, remove it based on what is fit for your workflow. All right, now let's talk about MCPs. You probably heard MCPs quite a lot all over online, and people always raving about it. I'm going to try my best to explain to you in very simple terms. Traditional applications, whenever they have to interact with data or external services or apps, they have to interface with these apps through something called an API, Application Programming Interface. An API is a way for you to be able to create data, update data, delete data, and insert and pull data from other services within your application. So say, for example, you have an app and you want to pull data, you would use an API from another app to pull that data that you would need. Now, traditionally, web apps are great at doing that, but we never had a standard or interface for these AI models or these large language models to be able to actually interact with this external data, to be able to actually use other apps to be able to pull data and update data and create data through these apps within the LLM itself. Anthropic came out with something called MCPs, which is essentially a model context protocol, which is essentially another way or another interface for these LLMs to be able to interact with other apps through. And it's just like an API. You can actually set up an MCP from another app and be able to actually interact with that app based on what they have available through their MCP configuration. So one MCP that I use quite a lot is called Firecall, and I'll actually include a link for you as well. And Firecall MCP is essentially an extension of all what the current app provides for you, which is be able to actually extract data, scrape data, build out sitemaps, and be able to see exactly very structured or unstructured data that you like on any website that's currently on the web right now. So you can actually crawl, search, scrape, and build out these files to be able to essentially have all the structured data for your app or for your project or whatever it is that you're working on. What we're going to do is we want to, instead of working with the app directly, is actually get the MCP installed in Cursor. Now, what you're going to do is go to docs.firecall.dev/MCP, and you can follow the installation instructions here. For cursor, you can add it manually, or you can just do add to cursor. Now, I'm going to show you both. I'm going to show you exactly how to do this in both ways so that you can actually apply this for other MCPs that have a very similar setup. A lot of MCPs now have the add to cursor button, which lets you directly add the MCP to your cursor. And all you need to do is put your API key in here. So I'm just going to log into my app, copy my API key, and drop it into here. And it's now going to be installed. Now, if you don't want to do this, you can actually do it the manual way. So I'm just going to erase this in here and show you how to actually add this manually. So you're going to go into settings, cursor settings, and in here, you're going to click on tools and integrations and add a custom MCP. You're going to go back in here and copy this configuration that we saw exactly, and then also essentially the API key that we needed. So we'll just drop it back in here. So you actually see you can use this format to add any other MCP if you wanted to. Now, how do you actually use this MCP? And I'll show you in a second, but let's just make sure it's enabled. There you go. It's added back in automatically. So there's two ways you can add MCPs, either directly via the add to cursor button, if some MCPs provide that, or you add it through the mcp.file folder file, like the file within the folder. You'll see exactly where this is. So this is in the cursor folder in mcp.json. So if we go in here and type in mcp.json, we should see, this is actually the project level MCP. Similar to rules, you can actually have MCP set up at a global level. So if I open up cursor on another project, we're going to see that we have Firecall installed as an MCP across all our projects at a global scope, similar to rules. Or if you want to add it at a project level, so you want to have MCPs only specifically for that project where you don't want to use it for another project. In this case, sometimes if it's Stripe MCP or your database MCP, then in the .cursor folder of your project, you create a file called mcp.json, and you can add that MCP directly in there. So what I can do is I can just erase this from here. I'll just copy it by erase it. And then you'll see in here, we have no MCPs, and there's no configuration. Now I'll add in here, and you'll see that we now have a project level MCP. So this is directly only for the project for this specific one. And you will see a button that says new MCP server detected, press enabled. All right, now that we have MCP set up, let's talk about how you can actually call a specific MCP and use it. Now we talked about how with Firecall, you can scrape, extract, and structure data all throughout the internet simply by just using the MCP instead of the app directly. So what we're going to do is in here, just write a very simple command that says, using the Firecall MCP, find me a list, or you can say, or scrape, it doesn't matter. Based on the semantics of what you say, the MCP will pick up a command of 10 websites that currently create no-code jobs. Instead of 10, let's do 5 just to keep it simple, easy. And what we're going to do is create a file called research.md. And now that we have a bunch of different MD files, markdown files, I usually like to create a folder called documentation or docs and just move everything in there just to keep things simple and clear. And in here, we have the research file. So we're going to say, please add it to research.md. And basically what's going to happen now is we're using the agent. We can do auto or just do Cloud4 Sonnet. And what it's going to do is it's going to call the Firecall MCP to then use a search parameter, a search query right here to find 5, or in this case, 10 no-code jobs. It's limited to 10, but it's going to look for 5. And it's going to return a format of MD and then actually add it to our research document here. So this is just one example of using one MCP. You can also have Perplexity search, or you can have some browser automation scripts to do browser testing and quality assurance, or Perplexity for actual deep research. And with these MCPs enabled, you can actually accelerate and elevate a lot of your workflow to just have it all within one single interface. You actually don't have to open up Google now or use another app and another page to actually scrape this data and do it all through directly in here. So what it's doing right now, it's actually searching for these jobs, job boards, and look these positions, and it's going to return some of this right here. And hopefully it will put together a very creative list directly in this folder right here. And I'm going to show you why this is relevant, or what we can do. Essentially, when we start with projects, we want to actually just use MCPs to enable a workflow to add additional data or additional context or research to the work that we're doing. So right now, we're going to add it to the file. So what we're seeing now is essentially something that would have taken us potentially half an hour or an hour to scrape or put together has been automatically done by agentic workflows and MCPs, where we're using the Firecall MCP to directly pull this information and add it to a list. That way, if we wanted to, we can just go ahead and take a look at some of these job boards and see how they're currently set up and what the inspiration looks like, and use it as inspiration to see what it looks like and as we build our job board. So you can see how powerful MCPs are. You can have completely closed loop systems all within Cursor, where you can scrape data, do deep search, do automation with Playwright MCP, and additionally actually access data sets through Exa and have it all within one platform without you actually leaving Cursor. From data scraping, data accesses, to deep search, to actually all testing, all done within this closed loop system. Okay, so now that we have our PRD, one of the most key important things is to get your development environment set up and ready to be able to actually work with the code that you're writing. So what I always recommend is that if you haven't already done this before, and chances are if you're a new developer, you haven't, you're going to have to install some certain packages and certain commands to be able to actually run your code. So you can actually get the agent to do this for you. So you'll say, I want to start writing code and development, but need to install certain things like Homebrew, Node, and Git. Please outline a list of things to install, why I need it, what it is, and if it's optional or required. So what's going to do is actually give you a full outline of everything that you need to install, and then with a list of kind of all the things that are optional and things that aren't optional, and then give you the commands to run it globally. You do this once, you don't have to do this again. So you can essentially run this command once, and then from there, go ahead and make these updates. So you say, okay, cool, we need Homebrew, we need Node.js and Git. And essentially Homebrew it's a package manager for Mac. It lets you install development tools like Node and Git very easily without having to go through kind of manual processes. And then Node, which is really important for us because we're going to be building with JavaScript. It's essentially a runtime it's JavaScript runtime for being able to run JavaScript outside of your browser. It's essentially allows you to install development servers and use tools like V and React and so on. And then also Git, which is going to be talked about later on, is required for you to actually have a version control system for your GitHub repo. So let's just go ahead and install the 3 things that we need. So you can say, please go ahead and install Homebrew, Git, and Node globally. And it'll actually run the command for you. You can search online for these requirements and you can see how it's done online and do it in the terminal, but you can just go ahead and do it here. It's also going to ask for sudo access, which needs access to your password. So you can just put your Mac password, and press enter to continue. And it's going to install Homebrew. Once it's done that, it's going to go ahead and install Node and then Git, so on and so forth. So you can just go ahead, let it do its thing, and then let it install. All right, now let's get to the fun part. We've gone ahead and generated a PRD. We've got our development environment set up, and we're ready to actually start building. So if you remember, we had a PRD for this job board right here, and we wanted to get started with actual development of the job board MVP state. So what I recommend doing always is start opening your chat and go with a new chat window, obviously, and reference your PRD. You're going to drag it in here, and you're going to say, based on this PRD document, please outline the MVP scope, create a step-by-step plan on how you would build this. Then from there, I will allow you to go to the next step. Ensure you explain your steps and decisions or thoughts out loud. And basically what we want to do is, as it's coming through building out a plan from the PRD, I want you to really think about how you can not only adopt the framework and the tools, but also the mindset. You have an opportunity now to essentially see exactly how a developer thinks through a development process for a project. And it enables you to actually see everything that happens behind the scenes. Because in the future, I want you to think of yourself as an architect here. You are responsible for guiding, curating, and removing blockers for your development team. But you also have a very strong and firm understanding of what it takes to actually build these applications. Because over time, as you're building this, you're going to recognize patterns. It's about pattern recognition here. I want you to see what it takes to build certain apps, and you're going to see over time that there's going to be similarities into how apps are being built. And sometimes you're going to run into issues that are going to be very similar across different projects, and you know how to actually approach it or solve it. So I'm looking at MVP scope here. It says in scope, public ending, client-side mock data, power listings. Okay, perfect. So the only thing I don't like is basic analytics. This is great. I think we can descope analytics completely and get started. So let's go ahead and essentially think about the MVP stage, and we've removed the analytics, and we're going to get started with project setup. So it's going to provide the exact commands and file structure. Yeah, so we'll say, please proceed with the setup commands and folder structure. Please ensure. So because the one thing about React is with the commands, what it does is it creates a folder for your app. We already have a directory called module visuals, and we want the app to just live in there. You don't want to create another subfolder. So specifically, whenever you're working on a project, so if you create a new folder, you open a cursor and you create a React app, ensure that you tell it to actually create the app in this existing folder and doesn't create a new one. Please ensure you create it in the existing directory and you don't create a new one. We'll get started with the React and Tailwind setup. So, yep, it says ready to run these commands. Please run it. So it's going to go ahead and run the commands. And see, it says, oh yeah, the directory is not empty. What do you want to do? I'll say ignore files and continue. It's going to create the app for us. So let me just expand this for now. I only have this browser open because I want to show you what a live preview of the app looks like. Okay. Now, where it gets interesting. There's some recent updates to Vite, and Tailwind, and we're going to run into an issue where it's not going to be able to install Tailwind properly. It's saying, hey, I noticed that I'm not able to run Tailwind properly, or how would you like to proceed? So we recently, as if you recall, we had Tailwind, which is used as a utility class framework for styling. And it recently went from Tailwind 3 to Tailwind 4. So basically what we're going to do here is you can actually guide the LLM or the agent to install Tailwind properly, just because there's a gap between how it knows how to install Tailwind and how it currently is. So we can say essentially, this is what we can do. We can either provide the notes directly in here and say, I see it has recently updated to Tailwind 4. Here are the instructions. So you can actually just paste in the chat directly, or what I've seen work really well as well, you can say is Tailwind 4 installation.md, and you can just drop it in here. Or if you recall, we had the documents feature where you can actually provide a link to a document, an existing document, and then just reference the documentation here as well. So you have multiple options. You can drag in here. Basically, what needs to happen is it needs to run a command where it does npm install Tailwind CSS Vite. Then we need to configure the plugin. Then we do the import, and then we run dev. If it doesn't do that, I'm going to show you manually how to solve that problem. Now, something interesting is happening here. It's stuck in the generating loop. Now, if you ever have that, you can always just change your models. You can do Claude Sonnet 4. Anytime you get an unexpected output or a prompt stuck in a loop, just pause it and change the model and see what happens. So it's going to now reinstall Tailwind properly. Yep. So it's saying there's a version conflict, Vite 7, it just recently came out, is not compatible. We're going to use Vite 6, which is compatible with Tailwind. So that now it works. All right, it's going to configure the plugin properly. So it's going to go in here and likely make a change. Let's see. Boom, perfect. and it's going to update the CSS file. So these are the folders that we have. These are the source files, and we're going to have in our index in our app CSS. I think, yeah, in our index CSS, they import properly. Perfect. Okay. All right. Components. Amazing. So what we're going to do something here is I want you to start having an idea of the technical overview architecture and the task at hand. So I'm going to say is what I'm going to do here is, this is what I always recommend, is please create 2 documents. One, technical overview that outlines the scaffolding, front end, back end, the text structure, and everything required to onboard another developer. 2, a task tracker to keep track of all to-do, in progress, done tasks. Update this accordingly. So basically what it's doing right now is actually it's saying what we've accomplished, what it made, and all the changes it made, and also ran a server. So I'm going to show you the different Git commands on how to actually run a server and explain what those are. But I want to first see the local server. So what it did, it ran npm run dev, and I'll explain to you exactly what these commands are. But it started a local development server using Vite. So if you click on this holding command click, it's going to open up your job board. Okay, count as 0, count as 1, perfect. And then in the meantime, I'm going to open up a new chat and say, in here, I'm a new developer. Create a document that explains each Git command and what it does. So basically, when you start initializing a repository and you sync it up with GitHub, you're going to be provided with a list of commands that you can actually do version control for your code. You can add files, commit files, push files, pull the latest updates from a repository if you're working with another developer. And more importantly, you're going to be able to actually have more control over the code that you push to your production environment. And there's other commands like npm run dev, where it lets you run a local server, or npm run build, where it builds your project to see if it compiles properly. So while the documents are being created, let's take a look at the technical overview. It says live dev server, repository, the technical stack, the project structure, perfect, our data structure, backend, amazing. So it has everything that we need. No Supabase yet, that's phase 2. Contributor guidelines, perfect. Okay, amazing. Now let's look at our task tracker. Perfect, completed tasks, in progress, to do. It breaks out all the different tasks it has to do, and this is good for context. I think these task trackers are really important because if you work on the project today and want to pick it up tomorrow, you have an opportunity to have context for your agent to look at what it's currently working on and what to pick up next. That way, it has full context of the code, and you don't have to retrain it every single time. Hey, I want to do this, but by the way, yesterday we did that. So it gives you a little bit more control and flexibility for your agent. Now, the last thing is Git commands. I think the key ones are specifically for repository. We talked about Git init to create your Git repository, Git clone to clone your repository from GitHub to your local device, and then Git add, and Git add adds all your files, and Git commit and Git push. These commands are there. I recommend you look it up yourself and see how it works. Okay, so we have our technical overview, our task tracker, and Git commands. Okay, and then we're going to switch here and say, based on the task tracker, can you outline the next immediate tasks? Great spelling over here, by the way, but yeah. Okay. Amazing. Perfect. Disregard the day timelines. We're going to do this all. So all now. Proceed. All right, so basically, we're going to get everything running and working right now to get our mock data up. So you'll see it's running, the agent can actually run terminal commands out itself, but I want to show you how that works yourself as well. So basically you can open up a terminal by clicking terminal here, a new terminal, or you can just do Control Shift, the squiggly lines below the escape. And what we're going to do is we're just going to run npm run dev. And basically how it works is you'll see that there's different commands here and different scripts that lets you actually run your code. When you click npm run dev, it builds the dev right here. It starts the local development server, the vSol server, and lets you actually see your code locally. So we're going to get started with the first task, and we may be able to see the real time what this looks like as it's adding the tasks. So right now it's adding mock data. So the key thing here is we actually right now don't want to set up a database because it's going to take a lot to actually set up a database to just see what the front end looks like. So we want to actually, for now in the meantime, just use mock data to get a sense of what does this front end look like. And then we can think about connecting it to the back end and connecting it to get it fully working end to end and having full flow in there. So right now we can see it's gone ahead and it's creating the scaffolding. It created the header, the footer, the layout, and now it's going to create the job card to actually display the jobs. So let's see what that looks like. All right, so we now created individual components, and React is a very component-based kind of code base where it builds out. It doesn't build the whole app all in one. It actually builds different components of it and brings it all together. So you can see here in the components page, it has a bunch of different parts of the application, and it then brings it all together to actually, it brings it in components and boxes and bases and to create a whole app here. We're seeing an error here, so it's a white screen, so it's likely something is broken. So the way you fix this is, let's see. So right now it's saying, oh, there's we need to make a fix, and right now the app is not loading. This is perfect. I want to show you how to actually debug this properly. So we're seeing a white screen. Likely this is an issue that's happening here. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to console. Console is the most important thing here, where it's saying, hey, I want you to look at what's happening behind the scenes and tell me if there's any errors happening. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy this and paste this console log in here. And then I'll also add in a screenshot and say, by the way, here's the console log. I'm seeing a white screen. And it says, oh, I see the issue. The external link icon doesn't exist. So basically a small icon ended up breaking the app, and we're able to see that in the console log. What we're going to do is see if this is going to fix the error. It still hasn't. Oh, it has. Perfect. So now we have a full working job board, and we can see it, and we can see that it's been able to actually create all the different components, add search, add categories and filters, and have full job details that you can take a look at. It's amazing. We just one-shotted with one prompt a full working job board with mock data. Now, the cool thing is it also updated the tasks. It outlined exactly what's completed, what's in progress, and what you got to do next. Isn't that insane and amazing? All right, now let's talk about next steps from here. All right, now let's get set up with actually removing the mock data and connecting it to a real database that displays information of these jobs. Now, the most important thing is we want to have backend functionality so that when you post a job, it actually goes to the database and lets you be able to actually see the jobs that are available and have an admin be able to review, accept, or deny the jobs that employers post. So what we want to do is remove the mock data, and then we're going to add a task tracker in here and technical overview and say, if we wanted to build out a flow for job posting, how would we proceed? I want to use Supabase and make sure this is simple. This is a simple flow. Should we allow anyone to post a job via the form and it gets added to a database? Then we have a hidden dashboard where maybe we do this. Maybe if we want to build out a flow for job posting, let's use Supabase. We let people create accounts as employers. So there is a sign up button. In the dashboard, employers can post jobs. Then we also have a hidden admin dashboard. I will create the user profile for it, and the admin can review, approve, deny the jobs. So I'm thinking we have a jobs table, a users table with roles and employers or any other necessary tables. Basically, we want to make sure that we have all the consideration in place around being able to have an employer post a job, being admin to be able to actually approve, review, or deny these jobs. Let's see what the agent comes up with. While this is happening, you can go to Supabase and get started with your project setup. So you can just name it whatever you want. I'm going to call this no-code jobs. Assuming you've signed up and had a plan, you can use a free plan or paid plan. And then you're going to go ahead and create project. And then what I'll do is I will just take note of the environment keys. And basically what you want to do is paste your anon key here and your URL. So the most important thing is just keep in mind that your environment keys are essentially the gateway or the keys to being able to access APIs or third-party services. So in this case, your database. So you don't want to ever share this anywhere. I'm sharing this with you guys for this resource, but obviously I would rotate these keys, delete it, and add some and use a new key. Now you want to make sure it goes into a .env file. And then the most important thing is when we go through the process of setting up a GitHub repo, you want to ensure that by all means you have in your git ignore file, the git ignore file. This is essentially a file that says when you push to GitHub, do not push these files, and you have environment variable files in there. Meaning when you push to GitHub, it does not include the .environment files. You have to ensure that your GitHub repo is private and not public and does not push these files, because if it does, your API keys get exposed. It's a huge security vulnerability. It will cost you money and risk the security of breaches and your data being leaked. So you want to ensure that you never ever expose your environment keys. Now, when we deploy to a server like Render or Netlify, I'll show you essentially how you would go ahead and apply these keys in the server settings so that when you push to production, it actually still works. Because if you're not pushing these environment keys to your code, you're doing it locally, how will you do it in production? So I'll show you how you do that process as well.
So one general rule as well is that if you happen to have added Cursor MCPs at a global level, meaning you've gone to tools integrations and you've added MCPs at a global level, but you also happen to have Cursor MCPs at a project level, meaning specifically to this folder and project, you have a .cursor folder with an mcp.json file in there, then you need to essentially always include this in the git ignore file as well. So anything related to API keys or credentials in your .env folder and your MCP.json, which technically has your API keys to the MCPs, then you need to ensure that this doesn't get tracked and pushed to GitHub. Despite, even if your GitHub repo is private, you don't want to explore these keys whatsoever and have it be potentially a security vulnerability. So always ensure that anything related to API keys, including any files or folders, is always including your .git ignore, and you're including the .cursor folder as well. I hope that's helpful. Keep that in mind as you're adding your API keys and pushing changes.
So right now, what we're essentially doing is we deleted the mock jobs, we installed Supabase via the package, and now we're creating the client configuration and then coming out with the schema to be able to actually create the tables for the job board. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the schema right here. We're going to copy this, and we're going to see that it's essentially enabling role level policies and has some commands for creating the tables. So we go to table editor, we see no tables, database is nothing. Go to SQL editor and create new snippets, and we're going to paste it in here and run it. Success, no returns. So when we go back to table, we'll see we have employers, jobs, and users, and we can see the database, how it all is set up. It's now just creating the front end components. I'm curious to see what the flow looks like. What we're seeing built now is essentially the dashboard and the logic and flows for being able to see jobs that are posted and the jobs that are going to be for you as an admin to be able to review. Now, we should be able to essentially get an employer to sign up, post job, and then have an admin also sign up through a hidden dashboard, be able to sign up and view the job, log in and view the jobs that are pending for review. And what I love about this is that it actually created instructions on how to proceed, right? So it's saying there's a public job board where you can where you can view and browse all approved job listings. There's an employer authentication process, there's a job posting process, there's a hidden admin dashboard, and then there's a database. Basically, we've gone ahead and created the project. We've set up the API schema, the database schema. Tables have been created. Now, to access the admin dashboard, you need an admin user, so you need to create an admin account. In Supabase, we're going to go authentication. We're going to go click on users. We're going to add a new user. And then basically we're going to use an email password that I'm going to remember and auto confirm user. Okay, great. And then basically, I believe in this, role, we essentially assign them as admin. This is employer. So we say, oh, admin. Okay, so now this user is admin. And then now we're going to run the server and be able to see if we can create. I love how it updated all the task trackers and the project summary, which is fantastic. So this process here, basically, we should be able to get an account signed up as an employer. So we're going to go Amir +1 as an employer. Oh, there is, sign up, sorry. And then let's see if it works. Oh, email not confirmed, right? I'm going to get an email confirmation. I've clicked on my email, I've confirmed it, and it signed me in. Basically, just think of the process of me going in and signing in. Now let's create a company profile, amirmxt.com, HTTPS, and then Amir's no code, okay. Create profile, amazing. Now we're going to go ahead and post a job. We're going to click on post a new job. We're going to say test job, Toronto, $80,000, $120,000, test description, https.com, and then we're going to post job. Okay, pending, amazing. Now, let's go to the admin portal that we had and essentially go and check to see how we can approve the job board. So if I recall, admin. So admin is going to be admin login. Okay. Created the profile for that. So we should see the pending job. Wow. Oh, there is none. So they should have been in the database if we check. So you see we have an employer and an admin, but in the database in the table, we should have a job that says pending, but we're not seeing it on the dashboard. Let's see. Pending review. Okay. Let's just double check. We're going to sign out. Let's go back into the employer login, make sure we did it correctly. Post a job. So this is pending. I believe it should show up. So if it doesn't, we can debug this, which is good. I want you guys to see the process here as to why things are not happening the way they are. So interesting. I'll say basically, so I was able to, so everything is working as intended with both the admin and employer flow. The only issue is that I have a pending job in my employer portal, but when I log in as an admin, I don't see any pending jobs. How can we debug this? So let's see essentially what approach it would take for us to be able to actually debug this specific issue of pending jobs not being displayed, because we're seeing it in the job board. There is a job here, but we're not seeing it in the dashboard of the admin dash. So what's going to do now, it's going to console log this specifically. Okay, perfect. So it's going to console log to see, okay, why is account 0 for this? So we have employer set up, Amirco. We have jobs in here. We have users, employer admin, which is working as intended. Perfect. So what we're going to do is essentially see that the job count is 0. So it shows essentially it's not pulling properly. Okay. Now we're going to do one more thing. Now, when this conversation is over, I'm going to switch to Opus actually. I like to use Opus for this because I think this specific bug is going to be interesting to solve with Opus. and we'll put on max mode. Okay. And we may need to run through the flow again together. So we're going to do everything all over again. I want to post a job and then go through the process of seeing an admin so we can just provide the entire console log end to end. So let's sign out here and then go back to the main page and then go post a job, sign in. Okay. Okay. All right. And then, so we have basically, we're going to go to Opus, Max. I'm going to put on max mode. I want to make sure that we get this working as intended. So we're going to go here, Amir, job, example job 2, Toronto, $80,000, example job. I'm going to put HTTPS, amirexample.com, and we're going to press job OK. Boom. So we're going to drop this console log in here, and then we're going to sign out. We're going to admin, login. We're going to sign in and try to debug. So weird. Here is the console log info. Let's see if it rated a. Oh, it says when the employer submits a job, user ID. The issue is the user admin likely doesn't have admin role in the database. Oh, I see, but it does though. If you. So we're going to export this. Provider type. So if I go to, it does though. So I just basically pasted a CSV of the table with the roles and permissions saying that no, like it does actually have a user and it has an admin role. Oh, okay, I see. It's saying that may be a potential issue as to why that's the case. So let's see what happens. Amazing. Now we have a flow working. It was an issue essentially with a job service that was basically trying to match the employer record with what's in the admin so that we can now see that it's being displayed there. So the best part of this is that we can say, yeah, it worked. We have the console log and we can just paste the whole thing and say, yeah, it works. It works. And it's going to most likely remove the console log. But let's approve this and see what happens on the main job board. Let's, if we refresh this, we may have to refresh the server. Oh, okay, so now we have another issue. Now we have a new issue. We approved the job board, the job via admin, but it's not being displayed in the public job board. So we're going to go back to the database and pull up the table and see what's the status. Has it been approved? Approved. So we're going to go export this. And then we're going to essentially open up this table now and say, hey, it was approved. It was approved. Look, one thing you can also do is I think you can, yeah, you should be able to just, oh, cool thing is you can now switch. But yeah, I think you should be able to, in the database tables, employers, no, yeah, never mind. Yeah, so I was thinking if there's an easy way to copy paste it. The issue, yeah, see, the issue is jobs are being approved but not showing public job board. Basically, same issue we had the job service before. So if we refresh this, we should be able to see the jobs being now posted. Yeah, perfect. So we essentially just built up authentication for admin flow and employer flow where they're able to send a job, post a job in maybe less than 20, 25 minutes. Now, the key thing here is anytime you run into any issues, always add console log. I'll always add a console log. 1, 2, always share the output of what's in the tables, export as a CSV or copy paste what you have, put it in there to debug. Try to use Opus for max mode so it has more context and it's smarter at solving very complex, challenging problems. Now, the most important thing also as well is that you can share the schema, the role level policy directly through here. So you can actually go into the AI assistant and say, share the schema, RLS, and the current data in the tables. And it'll give you everything, and you can just copy paste this in here to debug if you have any issues. And keep in mind that anytime you want to run queries, you can just create a new snippet, do it in here. Any point you're running into issues, and if you're still early in the process and you're going in circles, you can't solve it, start fresh. Just remove all the backend that you have, remove the database, delete it, and start all over again if you really need to. Chances are there's always an issue with authentication or some sort of role level policy that's not working. Now, keep in mind that with authentication, you can use third-party providers if you wanted to, but the most important thing is that there's rate limits. There's rate limits with emails. So if you, for example, in this instance, have a user sign up, you have to confirm your email. Supabase has limitations to what you can do within the local environment. When you switch to production, the email signups can't support that. So you need to use a third-party service using SMTP. Like, for example, I use something like Loops, right? And you can, I'll show you exactly what that looks like. It's a pretty simple process. So basically, I use Loops to send my emails, and they have a very easy process for you to be able to actually set up a hook for authentication in your users. So you can essentially, if I'm not mistaken, go in here and set up a very simple process where you use SMTPs and you just follow the steps here to be able to actually send your emails via Loops. Now, this is more, I can go through this if you like, but I think at the end of the day, you can just follow the steps exactly when you're ready to push your app to production. It's a pretty simple process to follow. They also have, like, this is based, you can sync contacts and events and send emails based on events, which is separate from using Supabase SMPT for authentication. So if you want to do authentication, follow the steps here. If you want to do event-based, follow the steps here, which basically looks for like hooks to happen within your app experience and then sends an email like, oh, for example, someone posted a job, send an email saying your job's been approved. But for authentication, follow this process here. Just type in Supabase Loops authentication and it'll tell you exactly how to set this up and get it going. And you can just copy, paste some code for the templates. And yeah, so now we've essentially created an entire job board. Let's deploy this to a production server. In this module, I'm going to talk about repositories and why they're important and essential for your apps or anything you're working on. Repositories are a way for you to actually store and collaborate with others on your code base. Say, for example, you want to be able to push it and get someone else to work on a feature, you would use a repository. But it's also important for version control. Say you work on a feature and you want to be able to then revert back to a previous state you had, you would use version control and Git commands to be able to get to that stage in the repository. So it's really essential if you're working on different features on different branches and you want to be able to just track those changes. I'm going to go through the exact steps on how you can push your code base to a GitHub repo. What I actually recommend is just using the agent to get you to set up, to initialize it. So you can say, initialize this code base for GitHub repo and outline the steps. What it's going to do is actually run some commands to initialize this current code base to be able to connect and push your first commit to the GitHub repository. So it's going to go ahead and initialize it for you. What it's going to do is create a GitHub repository, create a comprehensive README file, create GitHub specific files that we saw right here, and then from there, make the first commit to the project with proper commit history. So it's initializing it right here. And what we may need to do is actually go back to GitHub and create a repository or a link to be able to actually connect the two and push to that specific URL. What's also interesting is based on the rules that we have set up, it's actually creating a contributing.md file that's outlining exactly how you should be contributing your code. So this is relevant, for example, if you're working with other developers or even other agents that are actually using this repository, they can reference some of the documentation to outline the development guidelines and follow that. So for example, if you have someone else working on a project or even another agent, you can actually look at that file specifically and say, okay, so for example, here's how you fork it. Here's how you would approach feature suggestion or submit code changes. Also, here's the components. Here's how, here's the best practices and the code style. So it's actually really interesting where it's creating a set of rules that your agent can follow if we're to work on future features. All right, so we are now ready to create our first repository and make our first commit. So what we're going to do essentially is go to first on GitHub, click new repository. Then from here, we're going to call this, let's just PSM project modules, and make sure it's a private folder. It's not public. Public meaning anyone can see it. So for example, if you accidentally push your environment keys and it's on a private repository, anyone can see it and they will then use it. So remember, always keep your credentials private and keep it a private repository. And then basically you don't need to add a README file because we already have it. Git ignore is not required because we already have a template in there. And then essentially a license is not required. If you happen to have a license, you can put a license, but if it's a project for yourself, you don't need to. So we're going to go ahead and create this repository. And then we're going to get our URL. You're going to copy this URL right here and say, this is the URL. Let's make the first commit. What's interesting is right now we have no code in here. So what we're going to do is say, this is the URL, go ahead and push upstream. And I'm going to show you some of the basic commands from Git. I highly recommend you just use ChatGPT or any other LLM to give you a breakdown of Git commands. But the main ones you need to know are git add, git commit, and git push. And I'll show you an example of what that looks like in practice. The interesting thing is that in the event, if you're not familiar with Git commands or Git as well, you can always use the chat to get your agent to actually run these specific commands for you, or you can actually run it in the terminal as well. So you can say, push these changes, for example, and it will go ahead and do it for you within the terminal. You can just explain what you're trying to achieve and get it to run the command for you. We have now made our repository live. We've pushed the changes. We've included documentation on this. You can then actually visit our repository and see in here that the code has now been initialized and it's added in here. There is an env example that shows exactly this different URLs you need to put in here. That's fine because we're not actually exposing any of the keys. It just says, here's the different environment keys you need to have. We have a very comprehensive overview documentation that outlines exactly what needs to get done, which is very interesting. We have links to project documentation. Everything that we want is set up right in there. So I actually want to cover some of the common Git commands that you're going to need. And what they're used for is being able to actually make changes for your repository. I'll outline some of the best practices for this. So first thing we're going to do is, let's say, for example, we're going to make a change to the code base. So we're going to say, let's run this locally for a sec and then take a look at some changes we want to make. So we're going to go here and we're going to say, you know what, let's change this home page. I'm going to search it, find your dream no-code job, find your next dream no-code job. Okay, so we've now made some changes and we want to actually push this change. What you're going to do is essentially run some Git commands to push this change. Now, the most important thing is how Git repositories work are they're branched. So what that really means is that you can actually create different branches based on the different things you're working on. So best practices is that, for example, you have your main branch. This is what's going to be always your master or your main branch of all the latest code that you're going to be pushing to production, for example. And then you have different branches based on different features that you're working on. Why we do this is essentially, say, for example, you want to keep your main branch, but then you want to add a new feature that you're not fully done yet and you want to still commit. Because sometimes what happens is you have your main branch, you make changes, you push it. If you're connected to a production server and the build command is there, it's going to automatically push those changes to your repository to then your production server and make it live. What you always want to do is make sure that you have a branch that's separate from main, where you're working on the isolated feature. And then once you're done, you can then merge those changes to your main branch. So let's say like feature X, you finished it, you push it, push it to a branch, you test it, make sure it works. Then when you're ready, you merge it back to main, and then you push it to your production server. So I'll show you an example of what that looks like. Before we do that, let's just cover some basic Git commands. So git init, initialize your Git repository, git clone, close your repository. So say, for example, you've already created a repository, you already have code and you want to clone it. All you do is you open up your terminal, go to the folder, place you want to clone that repository, and say git clone, and you put the URL. So this is that URL that I added earlier for us to push to. And then from there, you can configure it with your name. So if you haven't actually logged in with before, or you haven't authorized it, the first time around, it will ask you to authorize it, and it'll just let you open up a link and you just log in. I don't have that because I've already done it. but the agent will walk you step by step on how you can initialize your Git for the first time. Git status just shows you exactly the changes that we have made to the repository. So if you recall, right now, we've essentially made a change to the homepage. So let's just say that on the homepage, we modified it, right? So we can see that we made a change on this homepage right here. Git status S, just the format. And then basically another thing is Git branch. This is what I use commonly. It just shows you the branch that I'm on. And then if I want to add this changes, what I do is git add dot, git add, git commit. So what this does is adds all the files and all the changes we made. So we create a new file here, git commands reference, and do git commit m changed hero text. We've committed this now. It's now in the repository, and we're gonna in the local repository, and now we're gonna git push, which basically says, let's push all these changes. Git commit says, I'm ready to commit these changes, and you add a message of exactly what those changes are. You can also ask your agent to do it for you, and then git push will actually push it to that repository for you. That's on GitHub. So what we're going to do is we're now going to git push. So if we go to right here, we see no commit so far. I'm going to refresh, and it's going to say commit made just now, and we changed the hero text. So it makes sense why you should actually have your commit messages. Now, say, for example, we want to make a change and show what it's like to actually create a branch, review it, and then merge it. So I want to actually show you an example, and I want to use an agent to show you this process and why this matters. So I want to showcase a new feature or button on the homepage and illustrate the importance of branching and merging your code base. Let's run through. It's funny, I'm actually using an agent here to kind of educate us through this process because I think it's going to illustrate it perfectly in terms of how we're going to be doing. So what we're going to do first is make some sort of change to the structure or add a new feature to the homepage. And what we're going to see is right now the branch is up to date. Then we're going to create a new branch. Generally, what you want to do is the command is basically like this. You go git checkout B, and then if you have multiple people, I usually start with my name, Amir, feature X. If you run that command, it's going to create a new branch, and it's going to actually let you work in that new branch. It's basically a fork from main, or a fork of whatever branch you're in. Right now, we do git branch, we're in featured company section. So I can also switch back to the main if I wanted to. I do git checkout main, and it's going to change me now to the main branch. So if you do git branch, you'll see I'm in main. But now I want to go back to the branch that we're in, git checkout. We're going to do this right here. Git checkout feature. What's going on here? Sorry, git checkout feature. Actually, you're going to see that we're now in the current repository. So what we done, I'm just going to walk through what the agent did. What it did is it created a new branch. It went into that branch, so it switched into it. It added a featured section or featured company section into our homepage, integrated a new component, added to the homepage, and it ran a test. So what you can see here is when we do npm run dev, go here, we should have a featured company section, right? Now, if I, for example, went back to the main branch, then technically it shouldn't be there, but right now the agent merged. So I'm going to show you another example step by step. Before I show you step by step, I want to show you exactly what the agent did, walk you through the example, then I will do one together. So what it did is it created a feature section. It integrated a new component with the home page. It ran it and it checked it locally. It works. It added the files. It committed to that branch. So I had all these new features. It did a commit, and then it went back into main, and it merged that feature branch with main. And then it deleted that previous branch. Typically, I don't delete branches unless I really need to. There's a reason. You really don't need to delete your previous branches in case you want to revert back. And then you can see the log history, exactly what happened. So what it did is exactly what I just covered. Added the feature section. It created a branch. The importance of it, it keeps the branch stable and deployable. It allows multiple people to work on it. So say, for example, I committed to the featured company section and I want another developer to go into that branch and make changes. They can also do it as well. And then it committed the changes, and then it merged it back. And now we have that feature section in main. So if I go to git checkout, git branch, we're going to see we're in main. We're going to npm run dev. We'll see now that we have this feature section in here. Okay, let's go through a step-by-step example together. So we have our current branch. We want to check we're in. So git branch. And what we're going to do is git checkout B, and we're going to call this featured job section. So what we're going to do right now is create a new branch. And then what we're going to do is say in this current branch, add a featured jobs section on the whole page, keep it simple. And I want to show you exactly how you would use agents to then just have it run Git commands for you to merge it back into main. This is important because, say, for example, if I had created this feature, for example, feature job section, and I want to push it to a repository, but I don't want to push it to main yet, I could create this branch and have another team member work on it for me. So what we're going to do here is just illustrate an example of why branches are important, so that in the event you have a branch you're working on, but there's an issue in main, you can just do git checkout main and then go back and make that change or fix that change or whatever the case is in your main branch. I just want to illustrate an example of that where I've had issues, example, where I've had my main branch stable, then I get an email saying, hey, there's a bug in your app, but I'm working on a different branch. And that feature, I can just quickly change back to main, fix that issue, push it, and then go back to my branch on whatever my work was and pick it up back where it left off. So we're going to check right now to see what changes we've made. So let's get status to see the changes. Okay, we've just made some changes to documentation. We've added a feature job section. We're going to run this locally just to make sure that we actually see it. And we have feature company and feature jobs. Amazing. Perfect. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do here is actually do git add to add the file and the files, period, git commit new featured jobs section. Now, don't forget, you can also just get your agent to do this for you, and it'll write really good comprehensive commit docs, and then git push. And then because it's your first time pushing, you have to do this upstream. It's your first time pushing to that specific branch. Okay, cool. And then basically, if we go back to our GitHub, you're going to be able to see that we now have a new branch called feature job section. If you click git branch, you'll see it's in there as well. Okay, now we are happy with the changes we made and we want to push it back to main. So if we check out main, you'll see that in main right now, we don't have this feature job section. It's just featured companies. We want to now merge this back in. So we'll say merge featured job section with main branch, add, commit, push. So what's going to happen is in the terminal, it's going to give you all the commands you need to actually push this. Let's see if we got the branch name right. Okay. You're already on main, so use git push to, so we made some changes to our main branch. I'm just going to git push for a sec. Okay, cool. Let's run the command again. And we can just do it in here, actually. We do git branch. I'll copy these two branch names. Merge feature job section branch with main, but do not delete the new branch. I want to keep it. Basically, what it's going to do now, it's just going to merge all the changes we made in our feature job section and add it to main and then push it. So merge feature job section. Okay, cool. Now it's just basically, it already merged it. We already made the changes. We had to do some pushes here. Perfect. Any instance, if you ever have any issues with merging, just use the agent. It'll help you do it. The reason why, essentially, what happened was I made some local changes that pushed it. So the merge already happened, but basically, because we've already previously merged it. So basically what we've done now is we've merged and we still have our branches. So if we want to change back, we can go back to the feature job section, but the two are the same now. So if we go to npm run dev, you'll see in the main branch now, we will have the feature job section, which is perfect. Okay, we've pushed this. We go back to GitHub. We can now see that we just made a change the last minute ago, and it now has our featured job section. So if you look at the commit, new featured job section, and you can do that. Now, if you're working with multiple people, then you're going to want to run PRs, which is reviews essentially. I'm going to walk you through a hypothetical here. PRs are really relevant when you're working with multiple developers, but in the instance of if you're working on a solo project, PRs are actually interesting because then you can do actual pull review and you can have cursor actually review the request for you and then have the bug bot run as well. And bug bot is a new feature they have that's an additional paid feature that runs behind the scenes. So pull requests are really just a collaborative mechanism It lets you do the code review. It reviews those risk mitigations. So usually for my projects, if I have another developer, before I push it directly and merge it into main, I'll do a pull request review or a pull request, and it just lets me gives the opportunity for the person that I'm working with to see the changes that I'm making, look at the differential, the diff, and see, is this right? Is this likely going to break something? And is it into standard with what he or she's looking for in the code base? So say, for example, what we'd have done differently here is we would have created a new branch. We would have made those changes. We would have added and committed it. We would have pushed it. And then we would have created a pull request directly through GitHub. And this essentially shows you what the request will look like. So you can see, here's the type of change I made. Here's what I'm testing. And here's what I've done to test it. And it just lets you just have more protection around your code and what's being merged into main. So here you create a branch, make the changes, you push it, then you go into GitHub and you create a PR specifically for that section. So what we've done here is we've actually pushed it. So now essentially what we can do is you go into GitHub, you'll see now we have a new feature we've added. I went through an example here and you can say compare and pull request. And you can just essentially see it's already added these pull request messages for you, or you can just add something yourself, something like this. And then you can be able to actually review and see the changes that have been made. So we're going to click create pull request. And then what it's going to do is, this is important because say, for example, you have two people working on the code base in different aspects of it. You want to ensure that there's no conflicts. Say, for example, if you're working on a new feature, someone else is working on another feature, but you're changing some common part of the code base, one is not overriding the other, and if you are, you're resolving that sort of conflict. You want to ensure that nothing breaks. We had a check that was not successful. Oh, yeah, that's fine. But yeah, no conflicts. We're good to merge this pull request. You can also see the specific changes that we made. So there's a pull request template we've added, and this is going directly into GitHub folder. It's not necessary. If you wanted to, you could have it. We made changes to the layout. We added a backplane. So we can go back and essentially approve this change specifically. So we can merge pull request, and it's going to merge this with our main branch. This is essentially really important if you're working with multiple people. You can leave the branch or you can keep it. I sometimes like to keep the branches. Now, in this module, we have essentially covered how to get set up with GitHub, why it's important, how to do pull request reviews, and essentially have your code saved so that if you need to version control or go back, you're able to do that. One last thing I actually want to cover as well is the importance of committing and when to make changes. Keep that in mind that as you're building your app or working on a project, you want to ensure that you're committing often around scoped work or scoped features. So what that means is if you're working on a specific feature and once it's stable and you've gone tested it, commit it, then work on the next feature. What that enables you to do is that if, for example, you worked on a feature and it's not working and you want to revert it or go back, you have the opportunity to go back to a previous commit. Now, in this example here, right, we can actually see at a very granular level all the different changes that we've made to our repository. And it gives you the safety net to be able to actually undo or revert back from the changes you have in case you deleted a file, something broke, some experimental feature that you're working on is not working correctly. And it gives you the control and precision to change it when you want to. So there's different ways you can revert and make changes. You can always just ask the agent, hey, something broke. I want to revert back. What can I do? It'll give you all the options and it tells you essentially what you're able to do. So undo the last commit, but keep the changes in that current repository. Undo the last commit, unstage the changes, but keep the files modified, or delete everything, forget it. Let's start over and essentially start with a brand new commit. So an example here is, for example, we wanted to revert the back to top button component. And I think what's really interesting here is just the mindset here. Commit early, commit often, refine later, which is super, super essential. You're able to actually have different points of your code base to be able to have granular control over if you want to revert. So in this case, we created a test file recovery, we added it, we committed it, and then we say, you know what, let's just remove this file completely. So what we do is we did git reset soft, which was the example that we saw up here. Where is it? Yeah, git reset soft, which is basically undo the last commit, but keep the changes in your current repository. And what it does is just it removed that file for us. It says, hey, we had this file, we just removed it, and it's going to actually clean up. So it just gives you a lot of control. And something I want to keep in mind is that always commit often and use the agents whenever you want to push, commit, and revert based on where you are. All right, so in this module, I just want to quickly cover your options to deploy your app. There is different ways you can be able to deploy your application. There's no right or wrong way. It entirely depends on your stack, your approach. I would say play around with different options, look at the pricing, see what matters for you. This is not an endorsement. I'm not recommending any of them. I'm simply saying these are your options and what you can do. Just figure out what works best. Use the agent, talk to the cursor agent, see based on this, which one do you recommend? It mostly depends on the stack that you have your things built on, what your database is, what the front end looks like, which of these servers support it based on that stack, and then how your current app is configured. In this instance, when I built this, I specifically wanted to be configured and ready for render and have the stack that is going to be supported for it. But you can see there's different options like Render, Vercel, Netlify, GitHub Pages, AWS. Just ask your agent for the recommendation. This is by no means an endorsement. I'm not saying you should do this. Just choose what works best for you. I just want to cover this module to show you how I would do it and how I would approach it. Everyone has different ways to do this. Just make sure that you choose the one that's best for you. So assuming you've gone ahead and actually, let's say in this instance, we're going to go with Render because that's what the recommended approach is, because it's like the stack that we're using, which is the JavaScript and HTML on the front end. And then we have the Supabase database integration. We're going to see these different options on our site, on the site, when you create an account. So static site or web services. You're going to choose static site. Why? Because you're making the request client side. You're making the request through the browser and not the server, because the server is already handled by Supabase. And it's a Jamstack. What that means is essentially we're using the front end, which is our React app. It runs in the browser. It makes API calls to Supabase and it handles routing with React Router. And on the back end, we're using Supabase, which is not our server. Supabase is hosting the server for us. It's our database operations, authentication, and endpoints. This is called a Jamstack architecture, which is JavaScript, APIs, markup. You would only use web services if, for example, you had you were serverful, you had your own Node.js or Express server, and you have very custom API endpoints you've created yourself. So you've created some API endpoints you're using. It's not the third parties API endpoints you've made, because we're only using API base as the API endpoint here. And you're doing server-side rendering, and you have your own server that you're hosting. That's when you do web services. Otherwise, you go with client-side or a static site, because browser downloads your HTML, React runs in the browser, JavaScript makes the API calls, all renders happen in the user browser. And this is what the difference of server-side is. What we're going to do here is just select static sites, then connect our repository. Once we have selected our repository, we're going to select, let's kind of by default choose the main branch. Root directory is optional. The build command, this is the command that essentially packages and compiles the code ready to be pushed to production. I'll show you what that looks like. So if you go in here and let's say you made changes to your code base, you would essentially run npm run build, which compiles and gets your app ready for production, and the build was done. If there was an error, you would get an error, and you can just copy that console, like the log from the server log, and from the terminal. In the terminal, you console that log, copy that log, put it in the agent, and ask it to solve that build error for you. And then basically, once the build is done, you can do npm run preview, which is essentially a preview of what your production version, production ready app would look like. So in this instance, we're going to go back to render here. And this is the build command, and then environment variables. So if you recall, we have some environment keys. These are the keys to connect to our database. We would add this in here. So you just go back to your environment file and paste exactly all the keys that you have in your current file into this here so that we can actually connect to our database. So we have our Supabase URL, our Supabase key, and essentially we can go ahead and get it set up. I'm going to rotate these keys. No one can steal this, but it's fine. Like I'm using this for the project example, but we're ready to deploy the site. One thing I forgot to know here is you should add this as well to the publish directory. This is where your build will go. If you're not sure, honestly, just copy paste or just screenshot this and put it into your chat, and it'll tell you exactly what the build configuration should look like. So we're going to go ahead and deploy the site. The site is being deployed. So you're going to see build logs, and this was similar to what I had in the cursor example that I showed you. In the event that the build logs don't work, you can always just copy the build logs directly and paste it back into your cursor agent chat and see what the issue is. So in this instance, I don't think we're going to get any issues because we built it originally and was fine. Perfect. And the build was successful and our site is now live. So if we click on it, we're going to be able to see the job board working. We now have a fully working app that we went from creating a PRD to creating features. We added authentication. We connected a database. We went through GitHub principles and how to deploy it. And in just a matter of a couple of workflows, we have a fully working job board that is now live in production. And if I wanted to, I can go ahead and connect it to, for example, a domain or have a custom domain added to it or whatever the case is. So if you actually want to make your project live and have a real project, you can just do add custom domain and follow the instructions through there. I hope that was helpful.